What is poppin' YouTube? Bringing you 5 players that I think are emerging as Dynasty stars as we head into the summer month. First player is going to be Kyle Pitts. And if you've been playing Dynasty fantasy football over the last 3 seasons, you have understood the community's love for Kyle Pitts, but you've also understood the community's hate for Kyle Pitts due to the lack of production that he's put up the last 2 seasons after his amazing rookie season. And now I hear you. A lot of people don't like buying into tight ends. We especially do not like buying into tight ends after their first year where he put up tight end 11 points back in 2021. In 2022, only played in 10 games before he did get injured, 7.6 fantasy points per game. And then in 2023, only 8.1 fantasy points per game in the 17 games played, was tight end 16. Now, when Kyle Pitts was at his peak, we're talking at the early part of his career, we're talking about his KTC value being somewhere in the high 6s, low 7,000 range. Now, if we look at his value today, it is only at 5,000. So honestly, he is only down to tight end 5 on keep trade cut. And so a lot of people are going to be saying, well, Caleb, his value really hasn't changed. Well, his overall dynasty value, maybe the positional value hasn't changed, but the overall dynasty value has changed. And for me, the hard part is you add in 2 electric quarterbacks into this Atlanta Falcons offense that are instantly better than anything that he's played with up into his career. You first add in Kirk Cousins, and we saw the wonders that Kirk Cousins did for my man TJ Hawkinson, where in 2022, tight end 4 on a points per game basis. In 2023, tight end 2 on a fantasy points per game basis. So we're talking about a top 5 tight end is what Kirk Cousins was able to establish with TJ Hawkinson. And TJ Hawkinson was fighting for targets with Justin Jefferson, who Justin Jefferson, in my opinion, is way better than Drake London. I don't think that it should be argued. So therefore, we got Kyle Pitts, who's in an offense with Drake London. They still do have Bijan Robinson out of the backfield, but I'm not concerned at all for Kyle Pitts' overall upside being capped by Drake London. I think both these guys are going to eat with this improved quarterback play, and his value really hasn't gone soaring up the dynasty charts. And so I think for me, I think Kyle Pitts, this is the year that he finally breaks out. We're looking at him being still 23 years old. Will be turning 24 this season. A 24-year-old tight end that breaks out. As much as I love what just happened with Sam Laporta, if Kyle Pitts can have any sort of similar type upside situation where he does finish as a top 5 tight end, we're going to be boosting Kyle Pitts up into that top 2 discussion that right now is probably mostly only Sam Laporta versus Trey McBride. I think Kyle Pitts is going to be there. So like I said, this isn't necessarily a trade video. This is my projections going forward. But if I did have the ability to go try to trade for Kyle Pitts when we're looking at guys in the similar range, like a Kyron Williams, like a Zay Flowers, like a Jared Goff, like a DK Metcalf in any of these Superflex leagues, absolutely love the value on Kyle Pitts. And I just think he's definitely going to be soaring up the dynasty rankings. I potentially think he's going to be a dynasty star this year, starting off here in the next few months. We then move to my next player, and it's going to be Tank Dell. And Tank Dell was definitely overshadowed this offseason with the Stephon Diggs trade, as well as the fact that Tank Dell is recovering from that fibula broken bone that he had in his foot. And now I know a lot of people are worried about Tank Dell. They're worried about the overall upside now being capped with Stephon Diggs. And I hear you. I think that's a lot to be said. I know there's some people that have been in the camp of the Tank Dell versus Nico Collins, and then you add Stephon Diggs and you're like, oh man, all these guys, the overall upside is going to be capped. We haven't seen CJ Stroud deal with this many weapons and really be able to look at the history and say, hey, CJ Stroud can produce 3, wide receiver 1s. CJ Stroud's able to produce 3 wide receiver 2s. Well, I think all that stuff is going to work out. I think the value right now on Tank Dell is exceptional. We're talking about him as wide receiver 23, overall player 59 on cube trade cut. He is 24 years old, so he will be turning 25 this year. He is 5'10", 165. And the thing is with Tank Dell, if we're looking at his overall value, he's only dropped about 4 spots over the last 3 months. Wide receiver 19 down to wide receiver 23 with the Stephon Diggs signing. So it wasn't like the biggest drop in the world, but he did fall behind guys like Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, depending on how you view those guys in Dynasty. I just think in Tank Dell in this offense, you're not going to be able to double anybody. You're not going to be able to double Stephon Diggs on the outside. You're not going to be able to double Nico Collins. You're not going to be able to double Tank Dell. And if we're really looking at the efficiency, wide receiver 14 on yards per route run, wide receiver 21 on yards per target, wide receiver 21 on yards per reception. I really like a lot of these metrics that are screaming out here with Tank Dell. And if we're looking at him, he was wide receiver 27 on routes versus man, and his win rate versus man was wide receiver 53. So I do like the fact that he is going to be going up against a lot of man coverages. Now we're going to have to see how they end up using Stephon Diggs, how they integrate Tank Dell, whether Tank Dell is going to kind of slide into the slot role, which I think could be super beneficial for Tank Dell and that overall big playability that he could have out of the slot. So let me know what you guys think of Tank Dell. I think he's a really great potential star here over the next few years. And the big thing to remember about Tank Dell is we got Nico Collins, who will be becoming a free agent next season. Stephon Diggs could potentially be cut after this year. It's a pretty minimal deal that the Houston Texans took on for Stephon Diggs. So I really like Tank Dell's overall value. value going forward. And I think this year, even in this crowded wide receiver room, Tank Dell, a lot of things that to be liked with Tank Dell and this overall upside. My next player that I think is going to be a potential dynasty star is going to be Dalton Kincaid. And I absolutely love some Dalton Kincaid. I mean, I like Kyle Pitts a little bit more, but Dalton Kincaid right now on Keep Trade Cut, he is a spot ahead at tight end 4. And I think getting these elite level tight ends, I think this year coming into Dynasty, going into Dynasty startups, the fact that you have legitly 5 great young tight ends, and then you add in the fact that you got Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce, we're talking about like 7 guys, and especially heading like into the redraft season as well, that's going to be absolutely great for you, as the tight end position has been pretty barren over the last 2 seasons besides the top 2 guys in Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews. And so when I look at Dalton Kincaid, he didn't have the most amazing rookie season where we're talking about him only as a tight end 14 with 9.4 fantasy points per game in the 16 games that he played. But if you really start to look at his game log, he really, like from week 7 to week 11, had a great stretch. 15.5 fantasy points, 17.5, 16, 10, and then he ended the season super strong, 12, 15, 14 fantasy points per game. And so for me, when we're looking at Dalton Kincaid, I think the ceiling is so high. We're talking about they added Keon Coleman, you get rid of Stephon Diggs. I think you have the argument to be made that Dalton Kincaid is the alpha level target in this receiving room for the Buffalo Bills. And I like my tight ends. I like my tight ends to be paired with a great quarterback, just like we saw with Travis Kelce with Patrick Mahomes. And that same thing is going to be true with Dalton Kincaid with Josh Allen. And so I think the fact that we're looking at him in the dynasty landscape, and granted, I know you like some Trey McBride. I understand that with Kyler Murray. I understand Sam Laporta had an amazing rookie season. But I think when we get into that tight end 3 spot and we're really talking like, hey, Brock Bowers or Dalton Kincaid, like I understand you want the upside of Brock Bowers, maybe one of the greatest generational type tight end prospects to come out of college. But Dalton Kincaid's like in a better situation than Brock Bowers. So I like some Dalton Kincaid. I like some Kyle Pitts. Both these guys are on my future stars list, and I'll be targeting them everywhere in my dynasty startups, in dynasty trades, in my best ball leagues. Like everything's going to be happening here with some Dalton Kincaid. My next guy that I think is going to be a potential dynasty star, and I actually think this is going to be a return to stardom, is going to be Deshaun Watson. And I understand how you might feel about his own personal life, what's happened to him, but he's looked like the ghost of Deshaun Watson over the last 2 seasons. When we're talking about him, first year coming off 15.1 fantasy points per game in 2022. In 2023, only played 6 games, same that he played in 2022 with only 15.1 fantasy points per game. And now I understand there wasn't a whole lot to be impressed with when we're looking back at him in 2020 when he did have QB5 overall points per game upside. 2019 was the QB2 on a points per game basis. Like it's been a while since we've seen that overall upside for Deshaun Watson. And I think a lot of people are thinking that it's gone. Like everything that happened with him, with his situation, it's gone for Deshaun Watson. And I am not one of those people that think it's absolutely dead. And I think when you're looking at his overall value here on Keep Trade Cut, QB 25, overall 93. Now, granted, in a super flex league, I think this is a great value to be had. Adding Deshaun Watson as your QB2, when we're talking about Michael Penix Jr., as much as I love the landing spot with the Atlanta Falcons, as much as you love the potential outlook of him being that Jordan Love, Michael Penix Jr.'s value is only going to go down as we approach the season, as the season starts. Unless something happens to Kirk Cousins, that's the only way that Michael Penix Jr. will be gaining value in season. Now, Baker Mayfield's another guy that's ahead of Deshaun Watson, who we love the upside. We loved what we saw out of Baker this last year, but he had to throw the ball so much, and really his efficiency wasn't there to really justify Baker as this long-term quarterback. I know he got the contract with Tampa Bay. I know he led the team really well, but when I'm looking at Deshaun Watson, I just think his value has just been depleted to the point where I still view him as a guy that can definitely get back into that top 15, top 13 quarterback conversation. And he's in the offense where you have Amari Cooper, where you have Nick Chubb, where you have David Njoku, where you have Kevin Stefanski, who is a good offensive coordinator to get the ball rolling. Now, did they sign Jameis Winston? Do they still have DTR? Like, they do have some quarterback options behind Deshaun Watson in case things do not go the way that they want. So I'm not saying that this is not risky. I'm not saying that Deshaun Watson has been a star. I think he could potentially get back to that potential stardom, and that's why I am having him here added into 5 players emerging as dynasty stars. And my final player that we're going to be talking about emerging as a dynasty star is going to be Josh Downs. Now, Josh Downs had a great rookie season from the metrics perspective when we're looking at him as wide receiver 51, 9.2 fantasy points per game, 98 targets, 68 receptions. Definitely had some big weeks. I mean, if we're looking in week 3, had 13 fantasy points. A week 5 had 15. Week 6 had 13. Week 7 had 23. Week 8 had 14. And then it kind of fell off from there. But the thing that we do know about Josh Downs is that he has a great connection with Anthony Richardson, but we didn't even get to see that connection play out because of Anthony Richardson getting hurt. Now, Gardner Minshew also liked Josh Downs. So I'm excited for Anthony Richardson to kind of come back in and take over this offense. Now, the big thing that people are going to say is, hey, they added added AD Mitchell into the fold. And based on what you saw out of some of the highlight tapes from rookie camp, AD Mitchell looks super good. Now, to anybody that actually bases their analysis off of some highlight plays that happen in minicamp, listen to me. You're already dead if that's going to be happening to you. Do not fall into the trap of rookie minicamp highlights. Josh Downs is good. I still think Josh Downs is the clear wide receiver 2 on this Colts offense. Yes, did they add AD Mitchell? AD Mitchell to me is going to be more of a downfield type guy, opening up the underneath for Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs, who Josh Downs gets to slide into the slot next year, which is going to be super exciting for my guy Josh Downs. And when we're looking at him, honestly, only had a 70.5% snap share. It was wide receiver 59, but he did play the third most slot snaps. And we all know that if you can be a good slot wide receiver, you will have fantasy football value just in the way that you get open. And last year was not maybe the best year for target accuracy, where he was wide receiver 24 on target accuracy, which for me, wide receiver 70 on yards per reception, yards per target, wide receiver 52. So he's not really getting a lot of the work down the field. But the thing that really impresses me about Josh Downs is as much as he gets those quick, short, immediate throws, he was wide receiver 19 on yards after the catch with 371. So I think if he can increase that target share where he was wide receiver 44, it was 17.9% target share. If we can increase that up to somewhere around 20 to 22%, I think we're looking at Josh Downs getting up somewhere in that like wide receiver 35, wide receiver 36 range. And you're going to be saying to me, Caleb, like that's not a star in Dynasty Fantasy Football. But if we're looking at the current value of where you're getting Josh Downs as wide receiver 52, I think he's more than going to replicate that investment that you make into him. And I think he could potentially be that star that I know that's like the floor that I'm talking about, but I think the ceiling's even higher if something were to happen to any of these other players in the Indianapolis Colts offense. So I like some Josh Downs. I like all these guys. Kyle Pitts, Dalton Kincaid. Let me know what you think of these guys down below. Let me know if you've done any trades for them. Let me know if they're on your team. Let me know how you feel of this video. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. We're going to be dropping more content this week, so make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.